What's good, everybody? Welcome to Origin Story, the podcast that interviews creators about where they came from to understand how they got here. My name is Phillip Russell, and I am with my co-host,
Ben Thorp.
And Ben, today we have another exciting conversation to add to the docket, this time about a game called Before Your Eyes. And could you tell us a little bit about what this one's all about?
Yeah, Phil, I feel like this is an interview I was really excited for because this is one of the games that I played just in the last kind of year that just stood out to me. The cool kind of like get you in the door piece of it is the game tracks your eye movements and uses that to tell its story. And so kind of to set up the story, the bit is that you are a character who has died. You're going to the afterlife. You're kind of in the afterlife, and you're about to kind of figure out whether or not you're basically going to heaven or to hell. And you have to tell your story. And so what happens is you keep being put back into moments throughout your life, but anytime you blink as a player, the blinks will shoot you forward in time.
So just think back to the very beginning, the first thing that you can remember. I'm going to send you there. But understand, no matter how much you like it, you're not going to be able to stay, all right? Every time.
And so it creates this like great kind of storytelling tension where there will be these moments that you really want to sit in and spend time in because there's like interesting story elements or there's something that's really beautiful, but you can't stop yourself from blinking. And so eventually you're going to blink and it's going to move the story forward. And I think that mechanic could have been a gimmick, but here is just like used really, really beautifully to tell the story about kind of life flashing before your eyes.
Yeah, 100%. We talked to the writer and creative director, Graham Parks, about kind of how they conceptualized Before Your Eyes from that mechanic of using the eye blinks to move forward in time. And it's something that I was really fascinated about playing the game and then talking to Graham about the game was just kind of like that tension and friction that, you're talking about, Ben, of like, how do you write a story or a narrative where the player has such like an impactful mechanic that they can impact how the story progresses? And how do you make sure that you're kind of conveying what you're trying to say when, somebody might not see everything that you've written? I felt like that was like it made for some really compelling moments throughout the game. And, it's about the length of a movie, maybe like an hour and a half, 2 hours long. You can play it in a sitting easily. Graham just had a lot of really interesting things to say, not only about like the mechanics of the game, but also I think a big part that we were really drawn to was what we've been talking about a lot this season of like the reality of the dream. So like in this case with Before Your Eyes, the team kind of all grew up together and were making this game in their early 20s, and they talk a lot about how much they needed to grow in order to make this game, the awesome piece of art that it is.
Yeah, I feel like you and I have had this conversation like a lot over the years, like even pre-OS. We're sitting in writing workshops and we're talking about how I feel like I don't have the like depth sometimes to write the story that I want to write, or that I don't really know that I'm like ready to like write the piece that I'm looking for. And I feel like a piece that kind of keeps coming up in those, especially like undergrad writing courses is like, damn, I guess you got to like live a little bit before you're like really ready to say something meaningful. And I think, Graham kind of talks about that here with just like, maybe we just needed to like put some of the elements of this story like in the oven a little bit longer just so that they were ready to kind of come out.
Yeah, for sure. This conversation covers so much about not only game development, but what it means to be an artist and kind of how you navigate, a budding career after success. Just a lot of really elucidating details in this conversation, and I'm really excited to present it to everybody. So how about we jump right into it and we can talk about all the good stuff in the post.
We're talking today to Graham Parks, who is the writer and creative director of Before Your Eyes. Before Your Eyes is a video game about the fleeting nature of life that garnered attention because of its eye-tracking technology and the integration of blinks into the narrative of the gameplay. The game won a BAFTA in 2022 for Games Beyond Entertainment. Graham, thank you so much for coming and talking to us.
Thank you guys for having me. This is awesome.
I want to start by maybe just getting you to talk about how Before Your Eyes started. My understanding is that it started as a student project called Close Your. Can you talk to us about that kind of initial game?
Yeah. That was Will Hellworth, who is I've known him since 7th grade. We took the bus to school together, and a lot of spent our high school years playing games together, talking about games and obsessing over video games. I went to NYU to study dramatic writing. I ended up minoring in game design there, taking classes at the Game Center, but he was at USC in the game design program. And he was the one that was going to go do it. He was always, his dream. And this was actually started as his thesis project. He sort of, I think, it came from a few different places. It came from, I think he was playing, that was a really fun time for indie games. The Blendo Games stuff was coming out. I don't know if you guys know, like 30 Flights of Loving, Gravity's Bone. But they were these very kind of wild little short games that featured cutting in this really kind of French New Wave weird way where, it was very rare to see a game that suddenly uses the language of cinema with the cut. Obviously, cinema is so much about the cut. And Will realized that commercial webcams could do with these plugins that were readily available, could do face tracking. And I think he just had this idea of what if we took it one step further from what he was excited about in the Blendo games, but let's give the cut to the player through their eyes. And so that was really, I think, the first inception of all of it was really this sort of blending of how can technology and sort of storytelling meet. And because of our relationship, he called me up very early in that process when he was trying to put that together, and knowing that it was going to have to be a very narrative game, and knowing that I would chomp at the bit to do anything like that. And for me, it was like, I was taking these classes at NYU, but I'm not technical, and I always felt a little on the outside, where I was just like I was such an indie game fan. But I never felt like, as a pure writer, and film director, I always felt like, man, I would really love to work in games, but I probably will never get that option. So when he called, and it was sort of like, as soon as I heard about this project, I was like, that's my dream project. Like that combines everything that I'm interested in into one, and kind of jumped on, and we made this little 10-minute version of it. That was his thesis project, and that sort of started this whole journey that then took from that point 7 years to release Before Your Eyes.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really struck me in the kind of almost immediately as I started playing it is that a game like this, and a game I think that uses a new technology, it's easy, I think, to understand that like it could have been in some ways a gimmick. But to me, what really stood out is that the narrative is so closely tied to this mechanic. For those who are listening and have not played the game, you are dead and you're looking back on your life, and the blinks will pull you out of the moments where you're kind of seeing into your past life. And so it kind of creates this tension where, at least for me, I was kind of holding my eyes open as long as I could to try to stay in these moments in a way that felt like, again, very rich. And so I'm wondering, as the writer and as the narrative director, like, what is that? When did you start kind of thinking about, how do I make this resonate? So it's not just a kind of simple, okay, I'm interacting with this game with my eyes, but it's actually saying something about like the themes of the game.
I don't even really remember how soon we got there, but it was within a matter of like a phone call that we were talking about using the blink as the cut, that we sort of and I think it was based on things that Will was thinking about in his life, going through situations with family members, and health issues. I think he was thinking a lot about mortality, and very quickly we got to this idea of like, let's do a whole life. And this idea of life flashing before your eyes sort of came to us of like, well, that's sort of right there. And what was so sort of perfect about the idea, and why it was like this one idea you hear about, when you're, it really was the strength of an idea that was that sort of crisp that it kept us on board for 7 years, and we made so many bad versions of it. But it was always this idea of just the kind of, as you're talking about there, like that, to find this gameplay mechanic that is inherently can only be done, it really can only be expressed through the mechanic, but it is so linked to the idea that time is fleeting. You cannot hold on to every moment. Inevitably you're going to have to blink, just like inevitably you're going to have to die. And it just felt sort of like instantly powerful, without much, I think good ideas just they don't take much work to explain what makes them good. It's just simplicity to that you like. As soon as I think we just arrived on that, again, I think it was in like a 20-minute conversation, it was like, yeah, that's what we'll do. We'll do somebody's life is flashing before their eyes, and you'll be a kid, and then you'll blink and you'll be older, and then you'll blink, and we'll go from birth to death, and that'll be the game. And as soon as it's like, okay, great. And then we basically made a million versions of that. And like there were so many different stories that we kept changing, because it was also, we were growing as artists and as people. Like we starting as like, college kids who, a lot of the writing, I felt like those early versions of it, I mean, the art is terrible. I mean, everything about it is a student project, and I can speak to myself. I shouldn't say it's terrible. I mean, it's student art. And, but my writing was very much, trying to pull at big themes that I wasn't, ready to do. Very pretentious, very, modeling, and sort of like, looking at sort of trying to do this death. I was into kind of like Arthur Miller, trying to do like a death of the salesman kind of thing, and just kind of going for things. And it again, I look back, I mean, it's sort of charming to look back at these early versions of the game. But what was funny about it was like, and we sort of knew like, oh, we didn't knock that out of the park necessarily, at least because again, you're at that age where like every 2 weeks you're becoming like, you feel like the person you were 2 weeks ago was so cringy. You know what I mean? Like you're you're evolving so quickly, that I think very quickly we were like, but we took it to, we ended up taking it to Indiecade and then getting to demo it, and people were coming and playing what, really was, I think, like a very rough piece of work, but it was making people cry. And it was really like, whoa, there's something here, even in this super rough form, with just the emotion of trying to hold your eyes open. You close your eyes, you open your eyes, and you're older. That just, again, it's the sort of like the power of just a good, simple idea, is that even if done badly, it can elicit emotion. And I think when we saw that, it ended up winning the Developer's Choice there. And then we did like another version of it that went to the IGF, and got the student award there. And that was like a totally different script. Like we wrote like, because every time we were like, okay, so people like that, but it can be better. And then we did another one, and it kept going like that, where it was like, but the one thing that always stayed true was the thing you just described, which was the sort of central metaphor, and the way that the sort of mechanic is so intrinsically tied to that metaphor.
That's interesting. I mean, before hopping on the call, I was looking at some footage of Close Your, and I was thinking about kind of what you're talking about of, the situations that, at least in the video that I saw, were a lot different than... I
wonder what version you were even looking at, because you might have been looking at the Kickstarter version, you might have been looking at, there's literally like 3 or 4 distinct Close Yours even before we changed the name to Coda. But anyway, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it was some kind of like... tester reaction video kind of thing.
That might have been the Indiecade one.
Yeah, I think it might have been Indiecade, and it was interesting because it's like the situations that were in there, I could see some of the DNA from like what ultimately became Before Your Eyes in there. But obviously, like you're describing, the situations were a lot different, and I imagine over the years of development, a lot changed. And something that I was thinking about while watching it is, one of my favorite directors is Richard Linklater. This director who has made a lot of projects who are who's interested in time kind of as a character within the narrative. And I think we could make analogs to something like Boyhood specifically. Like you're kind of getting these different scenes from somebody's life. And I'm curious, like for you as the writer on this project, what was that experience like, kind of writing this thing that when you're writing it, like a character might not see the whole scene, or like they might kind of flip past it. I'm curious, just like where was your mind at with that?
Yeah. Well, that is a lot to discuss there. I mean, that was sort of, well, I'll speak first to sort of a design thing that was interesting, and that version that you were watching, the versions we used to take to festivals. I will also say as a caveat, when I talk about the really bad version, the really rough version was something that was just his student project. By the time we were taking it to Indiecade and to the student awards, like it was coming along. So I don't want to be like fully trashing those versions. Like they were absolutely necessary, and there's some really good work in those versions. I just remember the very first one that wouldn't even exist on the internet, like literally had like pill people, like with little, like was literally like they don't have an artist, like just pull like a generic, Unity like shape. And it was basically as rough as it can be. Anyway, going to that question. Yeah, that, it was interesting because in those versions that we'd bring to festivals, literally every single blink jumped you forward in the story. And that was like a nightmare, obviously, as a writer. Because like it was sort of interesting in a weird way, and there was something that was kind of cool in this kind of, people would get these completely different impressions of things, and there was something kind of cool and Rorschach-y about it, of like everyone's going to sit down and like might accidentally blink through this whole section and then not understand this, but then because they missed that, they had this other theory. So there was something cool within that festival environment, especially with like a really short version of the story that was like 10 minutes long, where it was sort of like more of just this experience to just experience your life flashing before your eyes. And if you miss stuff, it was sort of like it worked within this little quick hit of something. But when we started thinking about, we kickstarted it and started to think about how we're going to do like a longer, kind of the aspiration was to do kind of like a movie length version of it that is sort of like around an hour to 2 hours. Very quickly, it became clear that like, you cannot tell an actual story that way, because if I don't know if you've skipped that scene, then I can't call back to something. That's the foundation of storytelling, is on some level building a structure. And so I think Bella Messick was a lead designer who came on later in the process, once we sort of had real funds to actually pursue the real version of the game that became Before Your Eyes. It was sort of like all those other versions we kind of consider almost like the short films that we made, and then we kind of got greenlit to do the feature adaptation. Very quickly, he realized, we with his help as a designer, kind of zeroed in on that problem of like, okay, so how do we keep you in scenes for the right amount of time, but then still, but it was always, we can't lose. It was sort of like our best thing was also, which was that jumping through time, feeling like time was just jumping and I'm not in control. It was sort of like the best thing, but it was also the thing that was making it kind of impossible to tell a story. So it was like this real process of how do we kind of retain the chaos, some of that chaos, but then still give me the space to know, okay, I know that the player is going to hear that line, and I know that they're going to get that. And so after a lot of iterating, we got to that metronome that comes out in the middle of the scene. So when you play it before the metronome comes up, you actually are blinking on stuff, and that's revealing things. You're doing little light interactions, and then that metronome comes up and people are still talking. The scene is still existing, but that's telling you as the player, watch out, now the staring contest is on. Next time you blink, you're going to jump forward. And as a writer, that's like totally, broke open how I could write scenes, because it was like I could, think about the very concise stuff that I need you to know about and put it on this side of the metronome. But then I could put all this more kind of character world building, just enjoying being in the moment stuff on the other side. And I think as a writer, that was almost such a blessing, because normally you're constantly cutting your scenes down to the shortest versions of themselves, because that's what good dramatic writing is in a lot of ways, like the most concise storytelling wins. But suddenly I had this excuse to be like, well, now we get to just live and just let people play. And we had such a great cast. Eric and Sarah Burns and Eric Edelstein play your mom and your dad, and I've worked with them, and I'm filmmakers. So I've worked with them on a short film, and they have such natural chemistry that I could just sort of let them go. Like I'd kind of write stuff, but then they would just sort of riff, and I would just say, keep going, because basically we wanted some of those dialogue scenes to last way past when you could possibly hold your eyes open for. So it was actually kind of really cool. It was cool because it was freeing to be able to write those parts of scenes where it was sort of like, just let the characters live and just keep talking, which is something that I'll probably never get to do again, because it was very unique to that project.
Yeah. I almost want to ask you this question about, Phil and I have been, I think, struggling with visual novels for a while. So we'll play a good amount of them. And a lot of times I feel like the visual novels are often, I think, trying to offer you just an added layer of interaction to try to make the story pop. And I think this is the first time I played something where it felt like uniquely moving in a way that I was like, oh, this is more than just a movie or more than just a book. And, it's doing something with that interaction that does actually like elevate what's happening here.
Thank you. That's very, yeah, thank you. And I agree. Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, like, what does this mean for you as a storyteller moving forward? Like, are you going to, like, how are you going to get that same high again, I guess is my question.
Yeah. Wow. All right. No, totally. And I think that there are, to the first point of part of your question, I think there were a lot of games that, we often looked more for inspiration to things that are not as much visual novels, but things that we're always looking for, those games that, I love games where I love narrative games. That's why I'm interested in games. I'm interested in games as a storytelling medium primarily. Personally, I play all sorts of games, but I was always interested in games where the act of playing them is the act of telling the story. Things like Papers, Please, or Her Story, or things like Florence was this mobile game. I don't know if you guys played that. That was really, really inspirational, where, no words, but all of those were these like little, mechanical metaphors, and that's sort of what we were playing with in Before Your Eyes, of like, how can a mechanic sort of exist? I think mechanics are often used as ends, which is great, but they're about like, they're games are designed to just make deep and interesting mechanics versus a mechanic that is serving as a metaphor for something in life. And so there's a few games that we were able to look to where it was like, what they're doing with the mechanic is the kind of thing we're trying to do with the mechanic. And those are always more of the inspiration for us than like visual novels or things that were like, maybe seemed more like these story games. But in terms of going forward, that's a really, really great question. I mean, that's the big kind of thing we've been wrestling with as a team, because we've started on a new game. It's going to be really awesome. I'm not ready to talk about it too much, but it was definitely, as we were searching for what that next game was going to be, I think we were living in the shadow of that idea is really perfect and succinct. And it was sort of having to go, we're not gonna find another one of those. And we have to be willing to explore other things that make us interested about games. So I think that we've finally found something, and it's going to be, we're very much motivated from the same place of like trying to find ways that games can tell stories in cinematic ways that can only be done in this medium. So that's still our kind of animating principle. But yeah, the kind of succinctness of that idea, for a while we were searching, and it was sort of like, you sometimes have to realize, like, it's funny, the sophomore moment that like the sophomore effort is always like a soul seek. You come out and you do something and it really works. It's like, well, we had 7 years to make that one. Now we have 2.5 to make the next one. And so there is this moment of like everyone going. There was a while when we would pitch or talk or bring ideas, would be like, but it's not like before. But Before Your Eyes worked in all these ways, and it had to. We had to make it a rule of like, do not bring up Before Your Eyes when we talk about other games, because it's like if you're constantly living in, it's like a living in the past. It's like, don't bring up your ex to your current girlfriend kind of thing. Like, you gotta let the new relationship form on its own terms. So that's been a very interesting process of like, so, I think we've actually found our way out of that woods. I wish I could talk more in detail about it, but yeah, it's again, yeah. I go back to Will and just being like, Will sort of really stumbled upon. He's a really brilliant thinker, and yeah, he's just got a mind that puts things together that you wouldn't. He kind of combines things in a way that no one else would, and I just credit to him for all those years ago going, oh, what if we did this, and 7 years later, here we are.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm curious, like, so Ben and I, we both come from a writing background. We went to like, I did an MFA, he did an MA in like prose and nonfiction writing. And we're obviously really interested in like interactive fiction and interactive projects like Before Your Eyes. Something that I'm curious about for you as somebody who also maybe came from more of that traditional side of like screenwriting. Now that you've made a game and you're working on this next project, what's kind of your like relationship to the genre as a writer? Is it one that obviously you're making this new game. Is this kind of like where you see a lot more of your work going, or are you still kind of somebody who's doing a little bit of everything?
Yeah, I'm still developing like a film project with um and so I'm still trying to keep that up, but really, I never expected that. I don't think we knew what to expect. It was sort of this passion project for so long that we did get investment. It kind of became our jobs for like 2, 3 years, becoming more full time. But we didn't really know what to expect. I think that it was very much a situation of like, we reach the end of our budget, the game comes out, and who knows, maybe we're all going our, because it's a very hard business. Indie games, it's not like a lot of amazing games, games that I love, unfortunately, can get lost in the Steam store or whatever. And I think we got very lucky, where it did sort of it kind of lit that fuse and it blew up, and our relationship with Skybound, our publisher, was really useful in that. And yeah, and we found ourselves in a position where it's like, oh, we can actually make a go of this and do another one. And so that's really the focus personally for me right now. Still have other projects that I've been developing that I'm going to continue to develop, but like, yeah, we're kind of all systems go on this next title. Will's actually doing another game. Will has another project. So we're kind of working side by side on two things. But a lot of the core team from Before Your Eyes is working on this next title that feels in a lot of ways connected to Before Your Eyes. And yeah, I think for me, it's again, as I said earlier in the interview, it's like, I come from a film background. My family's in film. Like that's more of like something where I expected to end up. But I always sort of was so fascinated by games. Like they were the kind of forbidden fruit for me. Like my parents never let me have consoles until really late. And there was like, very stringent time when I could play. And it was always like, and it was always like, it always felt like this thing too, that like, me and my friends were like, saw as cool in the future. But like, I'm sure you guys as gamers, it's like, there's this kind of way that it becomes your kind of punk rock or something where you're like in high school, where it's like this thing that you understand that, that I think that but I really did feel like from early on, like playing, Shadow of the Colossus and stuff at friends' houses and being like, this is the next artistic medium. Like this is the most powerful medium. I never expected that I would get in the opportunity to make them. So it was sort of like, but when this project came along, I was like, oh, better hold on to this thing for dear life. Cause like, that would be the coolest thing in the world to be able to make games. That's kind of like it. So right now it's pretty awesome. I feel very like humbled and lucky to be in a position that like, we get to make another game. And like, who knows, I feel the same way about this one. I did the last one where it's like, we'll make it, and maybe it'll just, maybe that'll be the last one we make, but then we got to make two. I don't, we're just kind of taking it like this one's a little bigger budget. We're trying to do stuff, that's a little more ambitious, still keeping the ambition, in check, of like, we're still very much in indie and we're not trying to, I would never be interested in like making anything that really needs to like recoup some massive amount. So it can't, because I always want to be able to make stuff that's experimental and that's pushing the medium. But yeah, I just want to see how much we can do. And the other thing that's exciting for me is like, I just love the medium, I love seeing like a new indie game that does something new. Is even if I don't like it, like there are games that I play where it's like, I don't think that really worked, or like, and I won't bring them up but when I see like a movie that I don't like, I just feel like, oh, I wasted my time. But with a game, especially like a more, something, in the indie space, I mean, Annapurnas are putting out, or things like these smaller indie games that are experimental, even if they don't really work, you feel like, well, thank you for making that, because someone had to find out if that worked. And that little piece of that really worked. And so I always feel like, I always felt that was before your eyes, where I was like, if this fails, it's a noble failure, and someone's going to find some part of this thing and be like, yeah, they got it wrong, but I know how to get it right. And it just feels like we're at this point in the medium where it's like early film, where it's like, there's just still, so you're still kind of like charting new so it feels like just being experimental at all, even if you're completely flailing and failing, there's still merit in that. You know what I mean? Where it's like, how many more bad movies do we need? So there's something that feels really exciting about, there's something humbling about knowing that like you are partaking in a language that other designers and game makers are going to be, even if they're saying fuck that, I hate that, there is an active discourse going on, like, because we are all making up this medium right now in a way,
Yeah. The thing that I think I really love about kind of what you're saying is the idea of like, it's okay to like fail in the art space, especially if it's in this experimental space that's like kind of trying to do something and say something. I'm going to loop it back into Before Your Eyes, which to me in some ways I think felt like one of the grand themes as you get towards the end is that like, you don't have to achieve some great thing. We come to find out that the kind of main character of the game is not an older artist who has lived this full life, but is in fact a kid and is making this stuff up because they're dying young and they want to feel like they've had some kind of full life that's amounted to something. And the game in some ways I think kind of says, no, like this life that you've had, this short life that you've had is still worth something. That you don't need to do all this other stuff or achieve all this other stuff. And I'm wondering how that kind of works with your own life as an artist, because I think that's such a common feeling of, well, if I don't produce something and if I don't get it in front of a lot of eyeballs, or if I don't, truly find a way to express this thing, then I have failed, and what have I done with my life? And so can you kind of unpack that? Because it feels like it's in the game, and I kind of feel like it's in what you're saying right there.
Totally. I mean, you probably have zeroed in on the fact that, like, yeah, I mean, I think myself and I think a lot of my collaborators on the game who were old, Ollie, and a lot of them were like old high school friends, and yeah, we were definitely always the like, the art kind of like arty kids who did have those sort of ambitions. And I think we were making this game through our 20s and failing, before that narrative that you're sort of describing. I think that we right before it was a sort of night as darkest before the dawn moment on the game, where like we had our kind of glory years of the student project winning those student awards and stuff. And it was sort of like, oh, cool. We're gonna make the next Gone Home. Let's do it. And then it was like, we kickstarted, we asked for way too little money, way too little money. We got it. It was like, and it was being funded by like, not like family and friends, but it was like people who are actually gonna get angry at you if you don't produce. And then very quickly, the sort of pressure on all of us, especially because as old friends and as people with these big egos, kind of all these aspirations, but then suddenly the pressure, and suddenly there was infighting, and suddenly it was other people's getting other opportunities and other career, all of our careers also, because it was never something we could go full time on. So it was always like trying to find these nights and weekends and kind of piece it together to try to get this thing done. And it just sort of just became this big sort of stress on all of our lives. And I think it honestly, like, I like to be on these podcasts like very open about it, because it's like, I don't know, maybe, the creative process is really hard. Working with friends can be amazing, but it can also be like really hard. And when you feel that you've promised something, exactly as you're talking about, like that, you had this promise out of the gate, that weight of expectation can just really almost just like shut you down. And I think for that, there were literally, there were years where it was just like the car, we were just like, it was literally years where we were sort of stuck in the mud, like the tires spinning. And I think that realizing that like a career isn't going to work like that. It's not going to be, you come out of the gate and then you achieve and you're a rock star and this and everything and everyone loves you. And also you wouldn't even want that. Like people who have that experience, it's nothing that you want. And going through that long experience of like then having the disappointment and, just sort of the change, I think for all of us that were going on, of just sort of like learning the things that actually matter in life, like as people that we're so focused on this sort of artistic achievement. And it's something that I still am constant. Like, I almost feel like we arrived at this theme, which was this message that we really need to say to ourselves to like become better humans, which is like, this is all just a career. It's fun. It's great. Feel proud, but it's not what makes you a good person. It being good or bad is not, it's not the thing that, and I think that's something that message, arriving at that through that process of humbling ourselves through really failing, like, and like, I sometimes feel like I can talk about the success, like, but sometimes I feel like people don't know how much we were failing. Like, I can't really even explain to you how much we were failing. Like meetings that were ending in yelling, meetings that were like our friendship spiraling, out of, just things. And we're all good now. Like everything is good. It's just like, it's a real family situation. But it was also a rough time. It's like right after college, people are so, figuring themselves out. But yeah, so I think arriving at that message resonated for us. And then it was really beautiful to see that. I think that was a message that a lot of people do need to hear in different ways. You know what I mean? Whether that's with an artistic career or if that's with, I think that it resonated with a lot of high schoolers because like we got a little kind of moment on TikTok where kids were playing it and talking about it. And that was really beautiful to see that, I think it was resonating. That's such a time when you are so focused on your future. Everyone's just talking about your future. It's all about, what are your grades going to be? What are you going to be when you grow up and all that? And like, and really from our, about elementary school until the end of college, for the rest of our lives, it's basically what's next. How are you like when you say, how are you doing, and at least in the world I grew up in, the thing that people say is, oh, it's great. I'm really excited that, I might get a promotion, or I'm thinking about, it's always some sort of future plan. It's often to do with career. And I think that, the game, that message ended up speaking to something that, that our culture needed to be reminded of. And I think we arrived there because we needed to, not in any way that we were like these evolved beings that like know that. It's like we probably more than anyone else needed that reminder,
That's interesting. I mean, I love that answer. I love the honesty of that because, something, that Ben and I have been talking to a lot of creators on this season specifically about is this kind of like the reality of the quote unquote dream of like kind of doing this thing that you love, or especially in a creative endeavor where on the outside, it can feel like you're saying, like everything is going perfectly. Like these people aren't struggling. They before your eyes, they just made it and it was great. And they had a great time, and I really appreciate that because it's like, Ben and I think I was just thinking while you're talking, like, I think I've known Ben for like a decade now, and we've been collaborating on projects since like 2015 or 2014 across multiple podcast projects, across different like scripted kind of shows and things like that. And it's one of those things where like this podcast, for instance, Ben and I both have a full-time job and we do this on the side, and you kind of just have to.
That's like, what it was for us for forever. Like for
you just make it work, right?
But you guys are making it work. We weren't.
Well, you don't see what's happening behind the scenes, just like you're saying with before your eyes.
Throwing things.
Yeah.
Before you logged on, he was just cussing me out. Yeah. He was like, "You are such a little bitch." It was like horrifying.
Yeah, it must have been tough. Yeah.
But that's interesting. I mean, I think especially the fact that like you all had been friends since high school. Like I was just so curious about like what that experience must be like, especially to for such a long process. Like the gestation period for a game is just
Yeah, I mean, and the team changed, and it was very helpful. Like when we brought, like bringing on Bella, like when we got this investment from, it was sort of this lucky thing where it kind of looked like we were heading to the cliff. But I think there was always this thing in all of us where we would read our Kickstarter comments that were just trashing us, and we would just be like, we do not want to, like, we do not want to be like. Also, just belief in, like, I know that this game, but it's like we do not want to. It's like we had the option, like what we were en route to doing was like, we're gonna just do the best we can, and we're gonna. But I remember just saying, like, a blood oath between everybody, like, we are going to give. If it's literally just the Kickstarter backers play it, we are not going to be one of those failed Kickstarters. We are going to give them some version of what they promised, because we asked for way too little money, like, and so it was all stuff. We all had to do it. You know, it was all. We were way past the point where we were using the Kickstarter money, so it was just our, sort of sweat equity or whatever, but we were definitely going to do something. But there was always this little part of me that didn't want to do that, because I knew that there was like that potential. And it was just a lucky thing where on the film side, I took a meeting at this company called Riot, RYOT, not Riot Games. We always have to make sure that's known. Then they do, like, they were bought by Verizon, but they kind of came up in the festival space doing like really cool docs and kind of like docs that like look at social issues and things, and then did a lot of like VR, and not even really in the game space. They were really in the more kind of like VR, AR, and then documentary space. But I met there and I talked about the project just like in conversation there. And this producer, Jake Sally, there just got really interested in it. And it was sort of like, then we had kind of a repeat meeting. And it really was like this kind of very lucky, like, I think if Jake hadn't sort of taken an interest, we probably would have just done that version of the game, which was just kind of like put something out that maybe it would have, people would have talked about it or something, but it would not have been nearly the game that it was. It would have been some little cheap little, like, more like the stuff we were bringing to festivals. But Jake saw something in it and sort of encouraged us at that point. Ollie, who was the sort of lead composer and had become the kind of project director, kind of really also kind of rose up and kind of became another director with Will and I. We kind of were like, we got this new lease on life. Like we can, like, suddenly it was like, we had this opportunity to go in and pitch this to actually ask for the amount of money that we should have asked for from the Kickstarter. And they were part of Verizon, and who we didn't know, but Jake was helping us through putting this pitch together. And it turned out they wanted to do it. And it was like, they hadn't ever done really a game before, but we were going to do a VR version of it as well. We were going to do a slice of it that we could take to festivals. That would be part of their kind of VR thing. And we were going to do that actually in South by 2020. But then we know what happened there. But that really changed everything, was like, and it wasn't like suddenly we're, all rich. It was, and it was still, for a lot of us, still part-time, but it was just that structure of, like, it really was more than, I mean, the funds, obviously, because to be able to pay artists, we got to bring on Bella, who became our lead designer. Obviously the budget, but it was also having this outside, having been these artists where when you're left alone, it's just arguing about what's the best version of something. And when you suddenly have this outside, it's the power of the deadline, and somebody who feels like an adult who is like, we need this by this and this date, then suddenly everybody starts acting a lot better. And then it was also about bringing on outside collaborators like Bella, and then lots of people joined from that. Dylan Terry, our sound lead, Richard Beer, our engineer, our great artist, Hannah Lee, lots of great people we were then starting to hire up because we had this money. And there was also bringing in those outside people who weren't so close to the sort of like toxic family dynamics, I think really helped us, become professionals, for the first time, and realize, like, this is a real thing. We have to put on our, we really, and we have to really rise to the occasion. Like, we're not gonna, we were really saved by the project growing. It's like it needed to grow outside of this little core of people that had been with it for so long. And it was also creatively like bringing on new voices who could see, because I think a lot of us, even though that idea is so great, and I spent the thing pitching how Will's idea, where I'm like, Will, you basically gave me this idea that I love so much, but I would say Will, even more than anyone else, at some point was just sick of it. He was just like, I don't even think this idea is cool anymore. Because if you work on something long enough, you don't see what it is. It's like if you're editing a film or something like that, you just and this magical thing happens when you bring new people in and you see them get excited for the first time, where you suddenly get to go, oh wow, it is cool. And so that's how it rejuvenated with bringing in new voices and collaborators. Was really the best way out of that rut, was just like bring someone in who can see it with fresh eyes.
Yeah. You keep kind of talking about, and you said something kind of offhand early on about this idea that in order to like really write this game and really finish this game, you kind of had to live more and like experience more. Can you kind of talk like what for you was that thing, or what were the several things where it's like, because I think that's such a common experience, especially in like undergrad writing courses, where your reach really exceeds your grasp in terms of like what you're able to communicate and make resonate, especially for a story that is in some ways, I think, summarizing like what is it to be alive. So what for you were the experiences that, between starting this thing really early on and the 7 years, you felt like you learned that helped you kind of tell this story?
Yeah. I think that we learned that, I think I learned that like exactly what you're talking about with the undergrad. So I've done some teaching of screenwriting to like high schoolers, and so I see it firsthand, and it's amazing to see in them like remembering, not yet realizing that like what your own experience is the most valuable thing that you bring to writing. And I think that you can be told that a million times, write what you know. And and I write what you know should never be taken literally, but on an emotional level, write what you know, even if it's a metaphor. But like, it takes a long time to actually learn that. And I do think that it was like those early versions, kind of seeing it from the outside of like, oh, so it's a story about, life, mortality, and like, what are other great stories about that? And then going and studying other great works, and going and reading, Portrait of the Artist as a young man, and reading these things and being like, how do I kind of graft this onto that? I think is a lot what you do as a younger writer, is you just sort of like graft the things you think are cool. You just try to like just kind of copy them and do your version of them. And I think it is that humbling process of realizing like, the reason that thing was great is because it was genuine, and you've just created a sort of lifeless corpse replica of a great thing. But then again, it's like it's the process you go through, and it's like how you get good too, because it's also what it's you. And especially with a story like this, it's a great point for you to say, like, and I always was intimidated, I think, and scared of it in a lot of ways, where I was like, this is such a fucking great idea that it's like, it could be done in so many ways. And like the best version of it could be the greatest thing of all time. You know what I mean? Like, I still feel that way. It's like, I still think that there's like, you could remake this a million times and get just the Blink idea is just so cool. So like, let's give it to Terrence Malick and see what he does. You know what I mean? Like there's lots of like, so there was always the thing of like, I'm going to be the one that does this. Okay. Let's, you know what I mean? Like, do I have that? And so it was me stopping, like thinking, well, what's the best version of it objectively? And me going, well, what's this version of it that we know how to do? And that's really the shift where you go, you have to lean into who you are, what you can say. And I think that once we got that money from Riot, I'd sort of learned that lesson in so many different ways. So it was a cool thing because we didn't really have like a team going at that point when we got that money. Like it was, most people had other jobs, but I was able to kind of be the first person in, which is a rare thing in games to basically, I knew we had learned so much about how to make this game, how it worked on a technical level, but then I had this long period where it was basically just me writing, and then Ollie and Will, us doing sort of story meetings and developing the story. I'd go off and write. I'd send them pages. We'd meet back up. We'd jump on phone calls. But it was like, me kind of work. I was working full time. Them supporting that process, and it was just like a 5 month, like what was like my 4 or 5 month writing period, which is like something that exists, in like Hollywood more. The idea that you're going to get the script right before you go into production. A lot of the times in games, because of now we're now experiencing how most games have to get made, where it's sort of like you want to retain your whole team, so it's sort of like you start firing all the, you start the race all together. But what was kind of cool because of the Way Before Your Eyes came was like I got a lot of time just to figure the story out, which was I think was a real blessing. And my first impulse was like, yeah, let's like digitize our old, we all grew up in Santa Monica. We all grew up like within biking distance of each other, Ollie, Will, and I, and knew each other's parents very well and stuff. And so like we all like digitized our home videos, and like we're watching it, would screen each other's baby memories and stuff, and just talked a lot about our childhoods, and all that stuff came in. I think for me, I started thinking about like when I was I didn't experience, the game goes to some very intense places, but I had some pretty serious medical issues when I was a similar age, a little older to the character in the game, and I had to have this big procedure done. I had to be held out of school for a year. And I think I started looking at some of those memories and some of like the feelings I think that were created by, at that time in your life when you're supposed to be so future oriented. I was like, it was ninth grade for me, kind of being taken out of the equation. And then sort of like life, watching other, realizing, just this sort of thing that sort of takes you off your course so that your life isn't having, especially at that age, like those milestones are so important, and the peer pressure of I'm going to be this and I'm going to be this and then I'm going to be this. And so, I was reflecting on personal experience, that experience, and then kind of figured that twist out. And that was sort of just all sort of came at once in like a conversation with Ollie, and we just sort of both sort of teared up, because it was like, it was almost similar to the idea was like, once we figured that twist of like, well, actually, what if it's a lie? What if this, because we always wanted the story to go from birth to death. And that was always like, I was always clinging to that. I was like, I know it needs to, but the problem is like, because I just think that's such a cool thing to experience in a game, to go be a child and then be an adult. But then but it was always, so it gets too big narratively. So then finally going, well, what if the adult part is a lie and is actually a reflection on the child part? And then that just instantly kind of went, there you go. There's your story. You know what I mean? And I went home and I wrote like a 2-page little fable kind of version of it. That was like a little fable. Like Benny wakes up. It was almost like a little kid's book version of it. Because I was also inspired. I was reading a lot and trying to be more inspired by like YA kind of like books that I loved from my past, like going into Bridge to Terabithia and things like that. Like kind of great sentimental YA. Like I love schmaltz and sentiment. Schmaltz. I say that I don't consider it schmaltz, but some people might. But I love like really, really heartfelt. That stuff was really important to me as a young reader, and I love to see that. I love Pixar movies. I love things that are unabashedly emotional and going after those things. So I was reading a lot of that stuff at that time. So I kind of went home and wrote this little thing. And so it really was exactly what you're talking about right there, which is like humbling yourself and then realizing like I have to go off of what I have. I can't try to just do the best version of it in some objective sense. I have to do, my version of it, and it takes a while to learn that as a writer.
Yeah, I'm so glad you got to that point in your answer of talking about the lie, because one of my questions was, I was really fascinated by that narrative decision and found it really affecting to kind of go through essentially like half or maybe a third of the game thinking it's one thing, and then it turns out that's a lie, and you get this whole other story that unfolds. And I mean, just like kind of reflecting on my experience with the game now, it's like such a smart choice, because you essentially kind of are able to explore like these two lives that we've talked about over the course of this hour, of like your creative life and kind of the aspirations that you might have in your artistic life and your artistic endeavors, juxtaposed with these feelings of like what actually is living life, you know, and like what does it mean to like have a fulfilling life, and it's not related to, you know, exposure and kind of becoming famous or, you know, notoriety. And you know, maybe just to jump off of that idea, I'm curious now, you know, Before Your Eyes has obviously won a number of awards. A lot of people like it. You were talking about like the TikTok kind of craze and stuff like that, and I'm wondering like kind of you know, the hottest TikTok craze.
I liked it. I felt like we got, it was like, let's make this a craze. It didn't quite go to a craze, but there were many TikToks going up for a little while.
Listen, on the top of my TikToks, it was the pink ooze, and it was Before Your Eyes.
Yeah. I'm curious, like what maybe how you feel about I mean, I don't have to call it like that exposure, like that kind of reaction to your work now. Because I think, you know, for instance, a lot of creators could go their whole lives, you know, creating a lot of stuff and, you know, getting some reactions, but maybe not on the same scale. I'm kind of curious how you're feeling about.
Oh yeah,
Interesting. Yeah, I know it is funny. I said that at the Baptist speech. That was my little pre-written joke. That was like, I was like, it's funny to collect an award for a game about how fancy awards are meaningless or something like that. But but then I said it feels good anyway, which is true. You know, it's like, yeah, I mean, it goes so far as to like, you know, you just have to hold those things in balance. But like, you know, it was amazing, you know, after this much work on something, and also doing it with people that, you know, you really, you know, if it were just, you know, I don't know. I think it could feel very isolating, you know, a success if it were something, you know, I don't know what that's like to be like a novelist or something, and you've just been in your bedroom and then suddenly you're famous. Like that seems like amazing, but also almost terrifying because it's so alone. But I think because, you know, I did this with people I really love and a team that I'm really proud of, I think that like, yeah, it's just been really, it's been really gratifying. And it's been really cool to see, like to kind of get an introduction to this industry that for me, as I was saying earlier, is sort of like, you know, is sort of like Wonka's Chocolate Factory a little bit, you know, getting to go to, you know, GDC and DICE and the BAFTAs and at the Game Awards and stuff, and being like, oh, there's Jeff Keighley, and it's funny because it's like for me, weirdly having like that's like game stuff is the stuff that just I felt like I would never kind of touch. So, you know, meeting, you know, the people at Sony and meeting people that, you know, getting to go to these award ceremonies with like Daniel Mullins, who, you know, I don't know if you guys have played Inscription, but Inscription was just destroying. Like Daniel Mullins was just taking home. They had to bring like at the DICE Awards. Was it the DICE Awards? Was it the GDCA Awards? They had to like bring like boxes to put his awards into because he could not possibly carry all of them home, and he deserved them. And he's also, what was amazing, it was kind of a full circle thing. Should I tell a story from Daniel Mullins? He spoke to us about how he spoke to us about this very thing. Like he's such a show guy. He's like a solo dev. He does, you know, he won Game of the Year at DICE and all this stuff, but he talked to us about this very thing where his first game was called Pony Island. And it kind of blew up and did really well. And we came to him and we were kind of like, we were like starting our next game. Like, how did you kind of figure that out? And he was like, oh, you know, he had another game called The Hex that was also awesome, but it actually didn't do as well as Pony Island. And then his third game just went like, you know, skyrocketed. And he was just like, my only advice and so he was so humble and so chill. And I was like, oh, you're like, he's probably just a great person. I don't know him really. I met him a couple of times. So I don't know. But in my head, I was like, this is because it's almost better to take that curve, you know, like that if it was just success and then success and then success, like, but he's able to be so chill and calm because his career doesn't take that straight line. And I think that he just said, my only recommendation to you is just make the next one because you don't know. And so just make the next one, and then the next one, it might be the second one might be worse, it might do worse, the third one might do better, like, but you just committing to the process and enjoying the process. I thought that was like really great advice to hear from someone that was carting awards home. And there, we won the BAFTA. We all the BAFTA was the last one, but we would go to the shows and we were just nominated. We were so excited to be nominated at all, but this guy was just carting them off. So it was like but it was really lovely advice. And yeah, that's where I think as a team and myself, you're just trying to keep it just trying to practice gratitude. Just know that it is all luck at the end of the day. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, I think it's just the luck of a great idea. And it coming out at the right time and it resonating and whatever. So, you just like, it's really as cool as we get to do this again. Like, that's really where you try to stay. Like, and I think that's what the game would hopefully teach. It's like, don't start fantasizing about, you don't start fantasizing like Benny does about, being, the cover of Wired magazine or whatever. Like, just make the next thing,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything that we haven't asked you yet that you think that we should touch upon? I mean, if not, like, this has been so good.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Yeah, this has been a nice therapy session for me. So no, nothing comes to mind. Nothing comes to mind. I'm really glad that you guys asked me on here. This is really fun.
And that was our conversation with Graham Parks, the writer and creative director for Before Your Eyes. Again, so glad to be able to talk to Graham about this game. As I feel like it has become a trend lately, this was another game where Ben has been pestering me to check it out, and I was slow on the uptick to get to it, but I eventually found 90 minutes, 2 hours, however long it took to beat it in a sitting. And damn, like, honestly, probably one of my favorite narrative games I've played in years. So thanks, Ben.
I'm just gonna, this is like encouraging me to be more of a pest and not less of a pest. And I feel like you don't want that in your life.
I mean, if they're as good as this game, then damn, I wanna play them all. Like, I feel as if, the mechanics, the narrative, the writing and presentation of this game, it was kind of one that, when you read like a really good book or something like that, at least for us who are writers, it's like, it kind of makes you want to write, or like it makes you want to, attempt to get back to your project. That's kind of how I felt when I finished this game, where I felt like so kind of inspired to want to get back into the things I'm working on and to, try new experimental things that, clearly this blinking mechanic idea really opened up the possibilities for.
Crazy that I'm hearing you basically confirm that you will be playing Disco Elysium now.
We all choose what we want to hear.
One of the other things that I think is worth highlighting about this conversation, and especially like, I think really resonates with me at least, and kind of resonates, I think, with this idea of art and the art that you make, is that I think sometimes it can feel like if I'm not doing my writing, or I'm not like working on, the projects, that there's a feeling for me of like, well, what am I doing? And like, is what I'm doing like enough, right? That like, I want my life to have some kind of meaning and some kind of value. And, at least for me, I've kind of decided that that's going to be through something like art or writing. And so when I don't do those things, or I'm not like finding success at those things, I sometimes feel like, I'm wasting my life, basically. And I think the theme or the message of this game in some ways was something that I like just really hit with me, which was, at the end of the game is basically like, your life has value and meaning and importance no matter what stage you're at, and no matter what you kind of do or don't do with it. And I don't know, that really stood out with me, and I think is part of why I found this game kind of so moving and, I guess, personally impactful.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of left the game just feeling like, Graham and the other folks on the team, it just had a very wise kind of message to it. I think, like, because I want to say Graham is around our age, like early 30s at the oldest. And to kind of create and iterate on this project for, I want to say he said 8 years or something like that, like basically your whole kind of 20s, and to kind of come out on the other end with this kind of really just introspective message around like the things that you create. You're more than the things that you create, right? That sometimes pursuing the next milestone before you appreciate what you have or the life that you have around you can be such a detrimental and kind of isolating experience, which I think is like really easy to get into as somebody who's an artist on the internet these days, So I think in that way, like it was just a really good reminder in a lot of senses to kind of value what you're doing now and like remember what else is around you outside of like the things you're creating in hopes of, getting notoriety or whatever.
Yeah, I have nothing to add to that. I just agree.
So, I mean, I think, Before Your Eyes, definitely worth your time. I feel like it's kind of been on sale a lot and like been in different bundles and, a variety of kinds of means to get it. It's available on Netflix now if you're a subscriber. And I mean, I think like this is a game where like if you have a friend or like you have a partner or someone who like isn't really into games, like this one, I don't know about you, Ben, but this one feels like the perfect one to kind of try to sit them down and play just because it's so compelling just on a story level.
Yeah, 100%. It doesn't ask you really to like get used to a lot of game mechanics. I think there can be a high barrier to entry sometimes just for like getting used to the gamey language of games. And this to me is like anyone can pick this up and play within like under a minute.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, I kind of feel like a little bit out of lost words on this one, but just to say like Before Your Eyes, really, really great game. Like I don't think I'm being hyperbolic when I think to say that, this is probably one of my favorite narrative games I've played in, the last like 5 years, probably. Like it definitely kind of lingers with you for a long time. So thanks, Ben, for the recommendation. It was
Let's
great.
Go. You can look this game up at beforeyoureyes.com. beforeyoureyesgame.com. You can also follow Graham at goodbye_world_. That's a pretty good handle. That's a good. I like that. Sorry, go ahead.
He's a good writer. So,
email us with thoughts, concerns, questions at theoriginstorypod@gmail.com. Our website, as always, is originstory.show, and our Twitter is at originstory_. Instagram, which is updated and good and beautiful all the time, originstory.show. You can follow me at sad_radio_lad. Phil, where can they find you?
They can find me on Twitter at 3DCisco. And as always, thanks to Ryan Hopper for the awesome intro and outro music that you hear after every episode. And thanks to Melody Hirsch for the awesome design work on the website and the cover and everything else related to Origin Story. I think that wraps us up for this week. As always, make sure to leave some feedback. Give us a review on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, send us an email. We'd love to hear from you, especially as we're kind of doing like these new fun little study hall episodes, so we can definitely expand upon a variety of topics that maybe we can't always get an interview for on the show. And I think that's it, Ben.
Yeah, leave us a review, or else our podcast will disappear into the feed before your eyes.
Damn. Well,
horrible note to end on. Let's call it. Let's call it.
See ya.